Ladies and gentlemen, please rise for the posting of the colors and remain standing for the national anthem.
You may be seated. My name is Danny Anderson. I am the Dean of the College of Liberal Arts and Sciences, and it is a true pleasure to welcome all of you for this important event. The College of Liberal Arts and Sciences at the University of Kansas, in many ways, is the heart and soul of the university. We include about 2/3 of the faculty. We teach about 2/3 of the students. And many people think about the college as being the engine that drives KU in terms of many of the things that we're able to accomplish. Tonight, we are here to honor General Charles Boyd as the 2013-2014 Distinguished Alum from the College of Liberal Arts and Sciences at the University of Kansas. I'm going to ask General Boyd and Landon Rowland to please come forward to the podium to take their places. We're going to organize this evening in a format that is going to be a little bit like a director's studio. Landon Rowland is going to do a short interview of General Boyd. So before they begin, just a brief introduction and to let you know a little bit about the significance of this award. Charles Boyd is a retired 4-star general of the United States Air Force. He served in the Vietnam War, during which he was held as a prisoner of war for almost 7 years. Upon his release, he came to the University of Kansas, ultimately completing a bachelor's and master's degrees in Latin American studies in just 3 years. He chose KU because he wanted to continue studying the Spanish language, which he began learning while in captivity. A fellow prisoner taught the language to him through the tap code, a system of sending messages by tapping on walls, one letter at a time. By the end, he learned about 2,700 words. After graduating from KU, General Boyd established a distinguished career in the Air Force, serving around the world. His military decorations include the Air Force Cross, the Distinguished Service Medal, the Silver Star with Oak Leaf Cluster, the Bronze Star with Combat V, and 2 Oak Leaf Clusters, Distinguished Flying Cross, and numerous other awards. His final military assignment was as Deputy Commander-in-Chief of U.S. Forces in Europe. Although General Boyd officially retired from the Air Force in 1995 after 36 years of active service, he has not slowed down and has continued to find ways to serve his country. He has chosen activities over the past 2 decades that allow him to continue his contributions in foreign and security affairs for the United States. Landon Rowland is the chairman of Lead Bank and chairman emeritus of Janus Capital Group. He is also chairman of Everglades Financial and Garden City Bank. Mr. Rowland has known General Boyd for the past decade as a friend and colleague. They have served on a variety of boards together, including business executives for national security. Mr. Rowland is a respected business leader in both Missouri and Kansas. He is directly involved in healthcare, financial management, agricultural biosecurity, social welfare, arts and science, military affairs, homeland security, and global national security issues. Many of the organizations with which he is involved serve the greater Kansas City area. I thank you both for being here this evening, and I look forward to a very fascinating conversation.
General Boyd said when he stepped up on the stage that he felt he was on the edge, but of course that speaks to his entire life experience. And I think you ought to start, Chuck, talking to us a little bit about how this boy from Iowa, this farm boy from Iowa, became so interested in airplanes and what happened to him. Did he have a special ambition for flying?
Well, I don't think I would give it that sophisticated an explanation. As a little kid, I just saw airplanes and I liked them for some reason which I can't explain. And my parents would drive down to my grandmother's house on Sundays, and we drove past a little airport, and they had a Piper Cub that sat out there, and a yellow Piper Cub, and I would look at that and say, "Daddy, can we stop?" And of course, we were always in a hurry. And eventually, he said, "All right." He got tired of listening to that, I guess, and so we pulled in, and this was a guy that did crop dusting during the week, and he'd take the tank out of the front seat and take passengers for rides. And so my dad let me go for a ride. I was 7 years old, and that was it, 15 minutes, and you couldn't take that back out of me. That's all I wanted to do, and so that's what I got to do. I got to do some other things, but that was the road to just about everything else that happened to me in my adult life.
And you perfected that dream, one might say, by early on deciding you were going to abbreviate your education by taking on flight training.
That's true. I started college, but I was an indifferent student, and what I wanted to do was go to the Air Force and fly jets. And in those days, you could do that without a college degree. If you could pass the quiz and so forth, you could get into officer training and pilot training simultaneously as a cadet. So I got to do that, and was commissioned and got pilot wings, and went on to, I did well at that, and became a fighter pilot, and as they say, the rest is history. But that was the road. That was the road for me. And it's also, in many ways, a bookend on my life. I own an Air Force trainer, an Air Force T-34, the very first airplane I ever flew in the Air Force 54 years ago. It's mine. It's got my name on the canopy rail, and I fly that thing all over the United States and have a ball in it. It's a bookend on my life in aviation.
It's an interesting bookend because if you follow him in the air, you'll find that he's given to acrobatics in this T-34. And I think it's really, some of us, not nearly so brave, would take on some of these exercises. What exactly should we look for you in the air doing?
Having fun. It's in my bones, it's in my soul, and I'll die that way.
You know, you've also said in another context that fighter pilots have an individuality, that really in some ways sustained you and the other men in captivity. And I think that was a lesson that some of us drew from your life experience and your remarkable survival. What do you say about that?
Well, I think that's probably true. I don't know exactly how to characterize it. The fighter pilots are competitive guys, and they don't like to be defeated. And that goes beyond just flying airplanes. To let the enemy get the best of you was not in our psychological makeup, I think. And fighter pilots do business alone, and so I think you can handle solitary confinement, for example, better than some. A guy asked me recently, I mean, in the context of civilian prisoners and what a terrible thing it was to be in solitary confinement. He couldn't think of anything worse, and he asked me, and I was at a dinner table with several people, and he says, "Can you think of anything worse?" And I said, "Yeah, I can think of things that are worse than that. Being in a cell with somebody you didn't like, for example." I'm not sure he really understood that.
When you came home and resumed your life as a U.S. civilian, not civilian, but in the service, what was the outlook for you at that time, having had such a really a challenging experience in Hanoi or in the Hanoi vicinity?
Well, that too is hard to describe. At the time that I was released, I had spent a fifth of my life as a prisoner of war. That's a pretty significant fraction, and an awful lot of things that happened in our society. Those were tumultuous years. You all know that probably a lot better than I do, but I came back to a society that I didn't recognize, didn't understand, and I was, I think, trying to just go off someplace and lick my wounds a little bit and figure out what to do with the rest of my life. I didn't know what I wanted to do with the rest of my life. I didn't know what kind of opportunities I might have, but I knew two things. I knew that I wasn't going to spend the rest of my life being a POW and nothing more. And I knew I loved this country in a way that I hadn't really even understood before I'd spent those years. And I wanted to serve it in some way. Exactly how, I wasn't so sure, but I knew that I wanted to serve this country. I had learned, as Dean Anderson mentioned, I had learned some Spanish in an unusual, unorthodox way, but that was among other things, that was a meaningful way of using my mind, and I kept those 2,700 words in alphabetized order and went through them on a daily basis so I wouldn't forget them and so forth. And I learned 700 verbs and some 3 basic conjugations and a few things, syntax, word order, and whatever. But I didn't know how to speak the language. The Air Force offered me the opportunity to go to school, if that's what I wanted to do, and since I didn't know what I wanted to do, that was kind of a stepping stone. It was well, maybe I could study Latin American affairs, and I could take advantage, and I could study this language more that I thought was so interesting. And my wife I'd been stationed at McConnell Air Force Base in Wichita, and that's where she remained while I was gone. A wonderful woman, by the way, one of the few that hung in there the whole time and was there for me when I came home. And she was a native Kansan, actually a KU graduate. Her mother had graduated from KU. A couple of her uncles had graduated from KU. And KU had a Latin American Affairs department, so I told the Air Force I'd like to go to KU, and did so. And I suppose in some ways that's the road that leads me here tonight. My experience at KU was, it was a very important step for a couple of reasons. I was looking for, when you spend 7 years in a virtual vacuum of information with very little new information to take into your mind opens up, I think, like a sponge. And the thirst for information, the thirst for knowledge just keeps growing and growing. And so I wanted to go someplace where I could learn some things and just to bathe and wallow in learning. And I got a chance to do that here with a very understanding group of professors, I think. This, mind you, is a period, recall, that the war of which I was such a part was not a popular thing, and particularly on campuses, university campuses, and it translated into, I think, in many cases, antagonism toward military people. But I found, and so I knew that, and yet I found that that experience did not spill over onto me for some reason. And the professors that I had, and even I think most of the students, treated me with a certain, well, the students probably thought I was an odd duck and didn't quite know how to deal with me, but the professors in the main treated me with a special deference, I think, and they could see that I was serious about trying to do well. And so they helped me in a lot of ways, and added work above and beyond their call of duty. So my experience here was a very positive one. I learned a lot that it was helpful to me then. I'm not sure that I left here an educated man. I'm still not sure I'm an educated man, but I knew an awful lot more when I left here than when I got here. And I'm grateful for that experience. It was a very positive one.
And that education at KU was the platform or foundation for your steady rise in the leadership of the Air Force and your general mastery of strategic responsibilities in the Air Force.
Well, I think there is certainly a connection. What you learn is not so important as the process by which you learn, it seems to me, and how to think analytically, how to address problems, and how to think them through, and I think that's what education is really about. And I certainly got my fair share of that, and it was helpful. I went on to get. I'd missed a big fraction of what's very important in the development of particularly an operational guy like I was. And also I had some medical issues when I came home, which made getting back on flying status questionable. So I had to do something else, and And it turned out that I could write well. I had skills, writing skills, and I got into staff work. And if you can think clearly and you can express yourself clearly in probably any line of work, but in particular in that kind of work, people start noticing you. And so I got some opportunities, I think, as a result of that. And the military, I think, is a place where it doesn't matter very much where you came from or what your background is or however humble your family relationships were and so forth. If you can do the job, we'll give you the job, and if you do it well, we'll give you another one. And if you do that well, we'll give you another one, a better one, a bigger one. And I was changing jobs so often I didn't quite know which one I was in, but I was in the learning mode. And I ran into a really wonderful man in Italy. I was serving on the southern flank of Italy, and this was an old general. I was working for him, and I'd been there for a year and a half in a 3-year tour. And in Italy, in particular, not very many people work on Saturdays, and I was in the office. I was probably the only one in the headquarters working, and my commander, this old 3-star, came in and sat down beside my desk, and he said, "I'm going to send you back to the States." I said, "Are you firing me?" And he said, No. He says, "You've learned everything you're going to learn here." And I said, "Well, where are you going to send me?" And he said, "I'm going to send you to the Pentagon." And dumb me, I said, "Oh, well, why would I want to go there?" And he said, "Son, I didn't ask you if you wanted to go." So he sent me to the Pentagon, and it was interesting. He sent me to work for a guy named Charlie Gabriel, who was a 3-star. He was a deputy chief of staff for plans and operations, and long time leader. So I went there, and they gave me a good job, and I was off and running. A long time later, his exec was in his office, and his exec went over to the file cabinet. He pulled out a letter. He says, "You've probably never seen this letter before," and he takes the letter out. And it's from that commander back there in Italy to Gabriel. And it says, "I'm sending this guy, Chuck Boyd, to you. I give him a hard job." He said, "He's one of us." And Charlie Gabriel later became a 4-star. He became the commander of the U.S. Air Forces in Europe, and he came back and was the chief of staff. I was in the Pentagon for 5 years, and I had 5 jobs, and I left there as a brigadier general. They gave me opportunities that were just fabulous, and it all worked out, and I just kept going, and so KU's kind of the kickoff point for all of that.
We should all claim that, you know. But coming back, you do find recognition of your judgment and your character in your elevation to a 4-star. I guess it was in '92, something like that. And that's, for any serviceman, that's a pretty remarkable achievement, pretty remarkable recognition, and it's certainly doggone rare for any soldier from Kansas. So in that sense, you have very
well,
special...
now, wait a minute. You got a guy named Eisenhower out here.
Well, I take it all back then.
Dickie Myers was a K-State guy. I can't quite manage that, but he's at Kansas, who became the chairman of the Joint Chiefs.
This is very good to have this kind of argument with you about your own eminence here, Boyd. It's great. So anyway, so we're in the service until '95, and you retire. And what did you think about doing with yourself?
Well, you know, the military is it's, sort of like the priesthood. I mean, you take a vow of poverty. You don't take a vow of celibacy.
Oh, my goodness.
But so I needed to make some money, I thought, and so I was certainly going to work. But I got interrupted. Newt Gingrich had become the Speaker of the House in '95, and I'd known Newt for a number of years, and so he wanted me to come and work for him.
No, wait a minute, before you go on. Tell them how you met Gingrich, how you became acquainted with him.
Well, Gingrich is kind of an interesting guy. He's a very cerebral guy, and in 1986 there was a law passed called the Goldwater-Nichols Law, and it was a reform to be a reform of the military services in ways that would enhance jointness and move the services away from the competitiveness that they felt. And it was a law that was conceived by members of the Congress, and Gingrich was one of those that claimed paternity. But it was without the agreement of or acceptance or approval of anybody in the military. Nonetheless, it became law, and then it became politically correct not to criticize the Goldwater-Nichols Law. Meanwhile, there had been a joint services General Flag Officer Warfighting Course established at Maxwell Air Force Base for all four services, and it was to be, the students were to be chosen from the services on at the 1 or 2 star level for people that they thought had the potential to be 3 and 4 stars. And so I was in the second class of that school, that new school, and they had a bunch of speakers that came in and talked to, mostly very senior military guys and Secretary of Defense and people like that. But they had one member of Congress, and he was a guy, a young congressman that I'd never heard of before, named Newt Gingrich. And so Gingrich came in and this is a class maybe of 20 people. And Gingrich lectured for 4 hours and no notes. I mean, you know, the broadest tour of the horizon you can imagine, from deep into history into thinking about outer space, and really an impressive run. But in the last hour, he did Q&A, and he, a part of this, he extolled the virtues of this new Goldwater-Nichols Law. So I took that about as long as I could, and then finally I raised my hand and I said, if you guys had really understood the thing you were trying to reform, you never would have done what you did. Well, he looked at me like, you know, it's hard for Gingrich not to have some kind of a comeback, but he said, what do you mean by that? And he said, well, I said, the Department of Defense is a tripartite form of government. There's an executive branch, a legislature, and a judiciary, just like the triumvirate, the 3 branches of our government. Now I've really got his attention. I said, the executive branch is the JCS and the Unified and Specified Commanders, say, formulation and execution of policy. The legislature are the services, the provider of resource to the joint operation, the avenue of articulation with the grassroots. The judiciary is the office of the Secretary of Defense, balancing the power of the executive and the legislature to make sure everybody's obeying the law. Now, what you did with Goldwater Nichols, you took power out of the legislature in massive amounts and gave it to the executive. Something you never would do with congressional power and give it to the president. And you've given so much power to the executive, they can't manage it, and it's spilled over into the judiciary. He said, well, I never heard that before. And I said, well, it's an original. But I said, it's correct. So he wasn't buying that, but I really had his attention. And so when the whole thing was over and he got ready to leave, he came by and he stuck out his hand and he looked at me kind of a squinty eye and he said, executive, legislative, judiciary, huh? Well, that started a friendship, actually. And later when he became when I became the commander of your university, I would invite him down with a few other members of Congress that were really intellectually interested in this sort of thing, and they'd speak to my various schools and whatever, and I'd always have them over for dinner, and I'd try to bring other interesting people. I remember I brought an old retired Curtis LeMay down to meet Gingrich one time, and we had dinner, and Gingrich and he got into it, and it was really interesting. And in the end, and we packed Curtis LeMay off to his BOQ room, and Gingrich said, you know, this is amazing. He said, I always thought he was just an old bomber general, you know. But after spending 3 hours with him, he said, I think it would not have mattered when he lived in history, in the time of Alexander or Caesar or Frederick the Great or Napoleon. He'd have been a general, and he'd have taken the available technology and he'd have whipped your ass with it.
Well, this business with Gingrich had a role in making you responsible for the strategic review that became Hart-Rudman.
Yeah.
And I think this is, for some of us, one of the most important accomplishments of your long career in thinking about the military and thinking about this country's strategic destiny.
Gingrich I had tried to help Gingrich for a couple of years and doing some long-range strategic planning and what have you, and that didn't turn out to be very satisfying for me. And so I told him I didn't want to do that anymore. And he said, "Well, you gotta stay engaged in some way." And he said, "The nation hasn't done a serious review of how it goes about providing for its security since the National Security Act of '47. He says that we need to do that, and so he went to Clinton and he said we need to put a commission together to do this. It needs to be bipartisan and so forth. And Clinton I don't think was all that interested, but he probably wanted something from Gingrich, and so at any rate they got together on an agreement, and they asked me to run it, to be the executive director, which I did, and it was an unusual. As a matter of fact, in my experience at least, in my knowledge, I think it was unique, in that most of these federal commissions are established with the people who are to be commissioners. You know, the White House gets to pick a certain number, and the Senate gets to pick a certain number, and the House gets to pick a certain number, and then they pick some guy that doesn't really have any authority to run the thing, And the people that have been selected by the Senate, they have a certain obligation or a certain sense of loyalty back to the people that put them on the commission, and the same thing with the House and the same thing with the White House. In this case, they didn't do it that way. They asked me to write the charter. So I wrote the charter the way I wanted it, which meant that I had all the principal authorities that I felt was necessary if you're going to do something like this in a absolutely objective way. And moreover, to give it some credence with the administration, I designed it in such a way that I would pick the menu of people who could be selected as commissioners, and then a combination of the Secretary of State, Secretary of Defense, and the National Security Advisor, the President, would pick from that menu, but they didn't get to put anybody on the menu. So I could pick people that I thought would be in an equal number of Republicans and Democrats. And so that's how that thing was formed, and Clinton told Bill Cohen, who was the Secretary of Defense at the time, to fund it. The only department had any money. And they funded me well, and we had the latitude to do the thing exactly the way we thought it should be done. 3 volumes came out of that, a volume on what kind of a world we're going to live in over the next 25 years. You can't do strategic thinking without having some concept of what the world is like and what the threats are, and you know, what kind of a challenge that the nation is going to have to face. So we did that. We held 33 conferences, brought in people from academia, from all kinds of technical and scholastic backgrounds, and cultural experts, demographic experts. What kind of a country are we going to live in? What kind of a world are we going to live in? I took members of that commission around to 28 countries around the world. We met with presidents and prime ministers and defense ministers and foreign ministers and finance ministers and academics and business leaders and police to see what other people thought, what kind of a world they're going to live in, what kind of country they're going to be in, and their regional partnerships and their relationship with the United States and so on. So we had a really good idea, we thought anyway. I got one of the best futurists in the world to come and work with us. And on it goes. So then we create this volume. We create a volume on national security. What kind of a national security strategy should we have to live and succeed in that kind of a world? And finally, we reviewed all of the institutions, the structures and the processes by which the nation formulates and executes, and made recommendations for what changes needed to be made to effectively execute that kind of a strategy in that kind of a world. The Defense Department, the State Department, the Treasury Department, the intelligence community, and so forth. And we rolled all of this out in January of 2001 for a new administration, and that would have been the plan, that we would give it, and nobody knew who was going to be president. We started 3 years earlier, and we turned that over as a gift to the new administration. Which showed very little interest in that work. The Secretary of Defense, the Secretary of State, and the National Security Advisor took our brief, but the President didn't, and the Vice President didn't. And although we called for, we said the principal threat to the nation is catastrophic terrorism. Americans are going to die on their own soil, perhaps in large number, for that reason. And these are the things that you ought to do about it, including the development of a Department of Homeland Security. None of that happened, and 9 months later, on 9/11, a lot of people got interested in some of these, and some of these things were adopted. So anyway, that's a brief chapter in my life, but it was, I would say this, it was It was one of the most stimulating, intellectually stimulating things I've done in my life, and I wouldn't mind doing it one more time if I had a president that I thought wanted me to do it and wanted to do something about what I told him to do at the end. And that is probably not likely.
You know, you have given...
We may be getting a hook here pretty soon.
Well, you're going to have to wait.
Do one more
You're going to
question
have to
here.
wait just a minute because
Okay.
you set him in motion. You know.
Okay.
And those of you who have watched this man in action and listened to this story from yearning to fly from some farmstead in Iowa and then coming for realization and refinement in Kansas. Refinement, Chuck. It's really still remarkable to hear how you matured and what gifts you presented to the Republic from your interesting experience, whether it's in leadership of the services or whether it's in the think tanks that you served. And in my experience with you with Business Executives for National Security, where you were having something to do with the unique role that we have in this country in citizen oversight of national security matters through Business Executives for National Security. You have been a remarkable leader, and all of the people in Kansas, I'm sure, are of one in praising you and acknowledging your unique spirit and your gift back over a long period of time. You can have him now.
So I agree with the comments that you're making, Mr. Rowland. We want to take a few moments because many of you here in the audience are personal friends, former teachers. You have followed the career of General Boyd. You have a few minutes for questions from the general audience. So the question is, what advice would General Boyd give to 3 members of the ROTC who are here tonight and are beginning their career?
Do the job you're given, and don't think about another job. Do that like it's the best job you're ever going to have. And let somebody else worry about what you do for your next job. I watched young military officers try to plan to game a career. And they just never do it as well as somebody else can do it for them. If this is the best job you ever had, and you're not looking for another job, you'll get another job, and it'll be better than the one you got.
Write it all down. Yeah.
One other thing. This is something I picked up from Al Lerner, who happened to be a Marine pilot, got out and became very successful, created MBNA and owned the Cleveland Browns and so. But he spoke at a graduation, and he told the young folks down at Quantico something that I knew in my soul, but I didn't crystallize it. He told them when he got up to speak, he said, "I'm going to give you the key to successful leadership in 3 words." And so, they all get their pencils out and they're going to write it down, and then he doesn't tell them, and he talks, and then he teases them, and eventually he tells them the 3 words. Officers eat last. It's not about you. It's about the organization. It's about the people that you serve as their commander. If you think about their welfare, you think about how the mission can only succeed if they do it and do it right. Think of yourself last. You'll be a successful leader. So keep that in mind.
Illustrious career after that.
So this is a personal question, so everyone can hear in the back, asking about when General Boyd returned to Kansas after Vietnam, and he became an assistant to a veterinary doctor in Topeka, and the way that that experience connected him to Kansas as a place.
That's absolutely true. Exactly how we got together, I can't remember for sure, but this was a remarkable man, a man that I liked a great deal. And he connected me with animals in a way that, I mean, I'd grown up on a farm and with animals and of all kinds and what have you, but there, somehow or another, he brought me into contact with animals in a way, in a different kind of a way, I think. And he also gave me some connection back with the agricultural part of what this state, of course, but with reconnected me with an agricultural aspect of my own life that I'd kind of put behind me, I think. So it was a great experience for me. I rode in his truck with him on veterinarian calls and helped him administer all kinds of things as his little helper and what have you. It was a great experience, and I'll remember him forever for what he gave me.
So I'm going to bring this portion of the program to a close. And I think as we move forward, maybe one of the easiest ways to move to the next part is to ask Mr. Rowland to step down from the podium. It'll make things a little bit easier. And General Boyd, if you could come over to the podium here and join me.
Don't want to fall off that edge there.
I know, it's a big step there. That's what I'm... So Tony, if you'll come forward. This is a part where I'm going to make the formal presentation of the award. Tony Arnold is here as the representative of the College Alumni Advisory Board. He is the current chair. Tony Arnold is a professor of law at the University of Louisville, an alum from the College of Liberal Arts and Sciences here at the University of Kansas. Every year, the College Alumni Advisory Board selects some of the most distinguished alumni to be recognized for their accomplishments as our graduates. And I want to especially thank all of the members of our advisory board who are here. If you would just stand briefly so that people can see all of you. It is a very rigorous nomination and selection process, and these are the individuals who, on behalf of the college, make the selection. Thank you very much. A liberal arts and sciences education is broad, and as you can see from the conversation you've heard here, our degrees provide our graduates with the insights, the skills, the opportunities to do endless, surprising, and fascinating things in the world. General Boyd's story of perseverance and service demonstrates the power of education as both transformative and empowering. His story as a prisoner of war is very fascinating. Even more incredible, however, are the decades of achievements that followed. Whether in active service to the armed forces or as a civilian, he has never ceased his commitment to promote the foreign and security interests of our nation. It is an honor to recognize him this evening on behalf of a proud Jayhawk Nation. As a distinguished alumnus of the college at KU, General Boyd belongs to an elite group. Past recipients have included the President of Colombia, a Nobel Prize winner, an astronaut, judges, lawmakers, entertainers, artists, authors, scientists, and more. So, General Boyd, it is a pleasure on behalf of the college to present you with the Distinguished Alumni Achievement Award. Thank you very much for all that you've done for us.
Thank you, and I'll treasure it. It's like a Jayhawk to me. Thank you very much.
You want to say just a few words, or?
It's, I didn't prepare a speech, and so I won't give one. But I do have a thought on my mind, and it's in the context of the setting and where we now are. I think our country is, I've worried about various aspects of our nation's security in various forms for my whole adult life. Sometimes at a very basic level, but sometimes at a strategic level. But I think I'm more worried about our country now than I've ever been. Our inability, it seems to me, as a nation, in particular as a political system, of dealing with and solving the great problems that affect the nation. There's a thing, in the scholars here probably know this, maybe all of you do, but there's a thing called the American National Elections Study Group, I think they call it, that takes the temperature of the nation about every 2 years and been doing so since the 50s. And one of the questions they ask in a scientific nationwide polling process is, do you believe that your government will do the right thing all or most of the time? In the 50s, in the early 60s, the respondent group said roughly 75 to 80% of the time, yes. Then came the Vietnam War and a lot of political turbulence in our country, and those figures started coming down. So by about 1972, we hit the 50% point, where about 50% of the people thought that their government would do the right thing all or most of the time, and 50% thought otherwise. Now those figures run around 20%, and they've been steadily coming down. People 40 years and under have never lived in a country where they believed that their government did the right thing all or most of the time. That's dangerous. And I don't know how to fix it. All the great problems that we have, we don't deal with in any. The Arab embargo in 1973, it was a wake-up call, and we've been working on an energy policy ever since, and we haven't developed one yet that's coherent. Healthcare. We spend 17% of GNP on healthcare, twice as much as any developed nation, and we get outcomes that are poorer than virtually any of the developed countries. And if you look at the CBO projections, we're moving that to 22% of GNP with the Affordable Care Act, which is clearly unaffordable. We elect political leaders that we like less and less and spend more and more money doing so. In 1974, if I recall correctly, to elect 535 members of Congress, the nation spent $77 million. In 2010, we spent $3.6 billion. And we like them less. We have less confidence in them than we had in 1974. The most recent election, we spent $5.3 billion electing a president and 535 members of Congress. The system that produces that, I mean, we are the laughingstock of the rest of the world. We're not going to fix the problems, and here's my point. We're not going to fix the problems of the nation from the top down. If we fix them at all, we're going to fix them from the bottom up. And that's where you guys come in. We'll do it in the educational system. And while the university system, I think, is sound, the elementary and the secondary system are broken also. So I think the burden of what happens to this country rests with the university system, with the education system. You people are more that are involved in it, are more important than you've ever been. Help us get out of this mess. All right? Thank you so much. Thank you.
So as you think about the things that you've heard tonight and the example of General Boyd, one of the things that we're striving to do in liberal arts and sciences is think about the ways that we can push at the boundaries to find solutions to many of the problems that face us. And one of the things that you've done tonight is give us an example. It's a comment you made early on in the evening to talk about the way that I loved my country in a way that I hadn't really understood. I think the challenge for us is to try and help many people, many of our students, learn new ways to understand why we love our country and what that means. So thank you very much. It's wonderful. Colonel Denning, will you come forward?
Please rise for the retrieval of the colors.